A day like today, when so many strands of the social justice movement have come together as both an expression of solidarity and a statement of purpose, is very much welcome. I think I speak for many of you here, people with a lifelong commitment to equality. It's been a tough few years, not only for the cause itself, but for those who've spent years in the fight, organising, campaigning, building unions, running tenants groups, charities, community projects, and mutual aid recovery fellowships, trying our best to keep the flame of hope alive through some very dark times. There was a time, not so long ago, when the political battleground was pretty clear to see. The task was to speak self-evident truths about poverty, education, health, criminal justice, the labour market, to organise, to plan, and to press those truths up the power structure with such force that decision makers would eventually have no choice but to listen. Though the fight for change was never easy then, I think we can all agree it was far simpler than it is now. For as we all know, the battleground has changed. The fight is now psychological, cultural, digital, scattered across more fronts than any movement can easily track. And it's no longer just the political class that need convincing. Increasingly, and perhaps most worryingly, it's the very people we have always claimed to represent. It pains me to concede that in recent years, we have taken a beating, as has our cause. We no longer hold a monopoly on speaking for the working class, the poor, or the vulnerable that we believed we once did. That honour is now fiercely contested. Our vision of a Scotland where the spoils of our rich resources are spread more evenly now competes with another vision, one which in my view is far less honest about whose interests it really serves. Spend time in any working class community across the country and you'll feel it. A new force shaping opinion, channeling legitimate anger and resentment, and organising, often more effectively than we are. And while people are right to be angry about hollowed out public services, decades of wage stagnation, and the skyward cost of living, the colours of the St Andrew's Cross are now raised, not as an expression of national pride, openness, or hope for the future, but as boundary markers. Far-right organisers openly speak in the language of ethnic solidarity, as though tougher borders and mass deportations could magically rebuild schools, fix hospitals, or cut rents. By swallowing this deception wholesale, many Scottish patriots, in my view, misplace their grievance. For them, the problem isn't that decision makers of all stripes have long sided with power and wealth at the expense of their communities, but that immigrants supposedly enjoy an unfair advantage in the great British rat race. In a country still defined by vast inequality, waving the flag can appear an act of strength, a symbol of resistance. But when the policies demanded won't raise wages, cut bills, or fix a single pothole, it becomes a hollow gesture. A poverty of political aspiration, equal parts tragic and absurd. And let's be clear here, for the benefit of those who are perhaps harder of hearing. The saltire takes on a very different meaning when waved beside placards that say, "Kill them all, let God sort them out," outside hotels, housing asylum seekers. While that conduct doesn't represent everyone who flies the emblem, and that is important to stress, it's of equal importance to note that those harbouring bigoted intent feel increasingly confident to run their racism up the flagpole for all to see. Though not with an inspiring vision or a plan for the future, but as a tattered white rag of surrender. A surrender to the politics of ill-feeling and contempt for the most vulnerable. A politics now steered by the same forces that gave us privatisation, austerity, Brexit, debacles that hurt working class communities more than any asylum hotel ever could. With misplaced anger as their only compass, and foreign folk devils forever in the crosshairs, this new patriotism is too busy chasing shadows to recognise the real enemy standing in plain sight. We now face the spectre of reform and the powerful story they like to tell. It's their favourite political party trick. They're the outsiders, giving voice to the people who've been ignored and sneered at. Their supporters, in turn, bask in the flattering glow of rebellion. We're the ones that see through the lies. We're the ones finally sticking two fingers up to the elites. It's a good story, but it isn't as true as it feels. Reform isn't breaking the establishment. They are preparing to wear its new mask. Nigel Farage likes to cosplay as an outsider, but he's the freshly anointed face of the far-right flank of that very same system. For years, he's set Britain's political agenda, something that quite simply does not happen without serious establishment backing. Far from being radical, the wall-to-wall coverage of Farage sits neatly within a long British tradition. Endless airtime for privately educated men whose central political preoccupation is targeting sections of the population too weak to fight back. And while he claims to speak for the common man, those who've helped him normalise his reactionary politics are cut from equally privileged cloth as him. Which is to say, they're about as anti-establishment as an Order of the Garter ceremony. They can wheel out Lee Anderson for photo opportunities as often as they like, but their pint and pub stool populism is an act. Reform is a low-rent Bullingdon boys club for Tory rejects with hardcore Thatcher fetishes. Reform don't challenge inequality. They plan to entrench it. Wake up and smell the foie gras, folks. These are not tribunes of the left behind. They're the privately educated ignoramuses who always abandon you. They shed crocodile tears for the traditional family a decade after applauding austerity that tore households apart. They sneer at the long-term sick while circling like vultures to sell the NHS off piece by piece. And when the sun rises on the first morning of Farage's utopia, when the last small boats have run ashore, the final asylum claims are denied, and Union Jacks, St George's crosses and saltires hang from every lamppost, a grateful UK will wake only to find her rivers still run with raw sewage, her GP surgeries still overflowing, and her roads still a fresh hell to drive. Train fares will still make your eyes water. Wages will still fall short of a living. And prisons will still be bursting at the seams. High streets will remain ghost towns. The cost of living still dizzying. And women and girls still abused without justice. On that morning, this grateful nation will discover that after everything it has sacrificed, it still cannot bear to look at itself. Only then, there'll be no more refugees to blame. They'll clear out the immigrants, then come for what remains of your right to collectively bargain. They'll line your streets with flags, then hand your family's health to faceless corporations whose credentials are never checked at the border, funnily enough. Hang on a wee second. I've accidentally touched the touch screen there, folks. Thus kind of dissipating the faith that I've managed to build in the audience through the course of the speech. But we will get there. Thank you. Appreciate that. They'll have your kids singing God Save the King every morning, then condemn them to lives of insecure employment and a hostile welfare state in sickness and old age. And if they get their way, once all the problematic immigrants are gone, the very patriots painting the town red in fits of nationalist fury will then wake to find crimson targets on their own backs. Reform are not your allies. They are not your friends. They are the establishment's spoiled, tantruming children, role-playing as rebels, feigning concern for broken communities they only acknowledge when there's anger to harvest. Reform isn't parking a tank on the establishment's lawn. It's cutting the grass and pruning the hedges. They claim to care about the safety of women, but where were Nigel Farage and Richard Tice when a financial crisis caused by bankers was paid for by austerity that hit the pockets of women hardest? They claim to value the safety of children, but what did they do or say when the two-child benefit cap pushed millions into the very poverty and deprivation that increases the likelihood of abuse and neglect? So let's stop asking far-right figureheads about immigration. Ask them what they know about the building blocks of health, secure work, affordable housing, access to decent nutrition, adequately resourced public services. Let's stop asking them about the two-tier justice system. Ask them what they intend to do about the two-tier education system, where 7% of privately educated people still dominate more than half of the top jobs across this country. The truth is, and I implore those taken in by these phony populists to recognise, that the far right have no credible answers to the problem facing this country, because they are the problem facing this country. But today, we gather not just to demand more of the Scottish Government, but to demand more of ourselves, because our power goes beyond mere policy or protest. We must also nurture the power of persuasion, meeting people where they are, not always where we'd like them to be. And I believe we are up to that challenge. The challenge of remembering that the digital public square is a poor substitute for real-world engagement. The challenge of showing restraint in the face of provocation from sneering client hacks and paper tiger provocateurs. The challenge of mindfulness that when we assume a public platform, or indeed any public visible role for whatever cause, we are speaking far wider than our own political tribe. Persuasion often lies not simply in being across the facts or holding deep convictions, but in how we hold ourselves in the heat of debate. We are not afraid of debate. This prospect interests and excites us. We don't shy away from testing our ideas against theirs. We welcome it. We don't merely tolerate arguments from the far right. We are ready to rise and meet them all head on, one by one. But there's a time for nuance and a time for clarity. A time for argument and a time to stand our ground. And that time, my friends, is now. If it's a battle for the soul of Scotland, the far right won, that is precisely what they are going to get. Because Scotland does demand better. Not better slogans or scapegoats, but better solidarity, better organisation, better vision. A Scotland that doesn't turn a blind eye to the failures of the Scottish Government, but holds its feet to the furnace. A Scotland that doesn't hoard resentment, but redistributes hope and opportunity. A Scotland that doesn't build its pride on who it excludes, but on who it empowers. That's the Scotland I will always fight for. That we should always fight for. That's the Scotland that demands better. Have a great weekend, folks.